Hello, welcome to your lecture on system acquisition in health IT. This topic is covered somewhat in your readings and the health IT toolkit. However, the purpose of this lecture is to complement that reading and to simplify some of the information. Understanding system acquisition and implementation related to health IT is an important skill as a nurse leader because you have to understand not only technical infrastructure, but also processes in your organizations and various factors that determine a purchase decision. These factors include things like patient factors, who's your patient population, healthcare providers' viewpoints, organizational missions and factors, social cultural contexts in your organizations, as well as national policies. When starting to learn about the management and cost issues related to health IT, I want to emphasize that nursing must be in the position to lead and participate in health IT selection, development, and optimization. This does not mean for just large healthcare systems, like, for example, VCU acquiring Epic, but more on a smaller scale of units acquiring certain health ITs. It's a role that nurse leaders need to know across organizations and across nursing leadership roles, such as clinical leads, nurse managers, directors of different nursing services. So when we look at health IT adoption, it's pretty complex, especially when we're talking about health IT adoption in the clinical setting. This model is a theoretical framework that helps to just explain the complexities facing clinical situations. The main components of this model are the users, governance, technology, and content. These four components overlap, as you notice, and they're all surrounded by permeable and at times really unclear boundaries between the organization and its surrounding environment. We need to recognize the technical, organizational, and personal aspects of technology adoption and implementation. Organizational perspectives may include policies of your organizations, procedures of the organizations, as well as the organization's vision, goals, politics, and I'm going to say that again, politics and culture. The personal perspectives are the individual thoughts and behaviors of the key players. When we're talking about health IT, it is extremely important to plan well because planning helps you to avoid problems. I want you to stop and think about your practice right now. Have you been part of an adoption of a new system or any just small thing in your units? Have they gone well? Did they consider the users? Did they consider training time? Was it a disaster? That's what we're trying to do when we're thinking about good planning, because good planning helps to prevent those things from happening. So, important to avoid problems as much as possible, and this begins with the earliest point in selection, purchase, and implementation. There must be identified goals for adopting a health IT system, which can help lead to smart decisions in the type of software selected. So you have to know what you want to achieve before you can go ahead and select something. And again, I can't emphasize enough the significance of involving the end user. So your nurses on your units, the providers, whoever is going to be using the system at the point of care needs to be part or a player in this planning process. It is also critical to plan for a build and install of system really carefully, and while planning to listen to all the comments of all the key players. We all come to life with different lenses and we all see things differently. But by listening to others during this phase, We can think about what the problems might be out of their pair of glasses and address those prior to doing an implementation. Obviously, you also want to strive for an attitude of possibility and flexibility with availability during the process. So let's talk about the life cycle. Sometimes you try to talk well and sometimes you can't. So the life cycle of a clinical computing system. The life cycle includes 3 parts: system acquisition, the project, and the operations. In the first part is the acquisition. You are investigating, selecting, and contracting for a build. Contracting for either a system or a build of a system. The second part is the actual project, which is the part of planning, building, training, implementing the system. And finally, the third part is operations. This lecture and the next lecture are going to be in the acquisition and implementation, as the operations part are covered in many other your selected readings. So, system acquisition. This phase, there's lots of things to consider. In the process, you have to think about the timeliness in your decision making. So to select a new system or replace an existing system until the time of a contract has been negotiated inside, this is the time of the system acquisition phase. Remember that this is separate from system implementation. The actual system acquisition process can take from a few days to a couple of years, depending on the organization's size, its structure, and complexity, as well as the needs of the organization. So, what are the factors to consider? Factors to consider are things like organizational readiness. If we're going to get a new EHR, are we ready for that? Do we have other priorities? Do we have too many other things going on? The clinical and operational ownership and leadership. If you don't have buy-in from above or don't have buy-in from your executive and above there, it's going to be really hard to do. Drivers in your decision maker to implement the clinical system. Internal drivers, such as quality initiatives. Are there things going on that would make you want to have a system because you need to capture things? External drivers, which are regulatory requirements. So we talked about meaningful use just a little while ago in the previous lectures. And, those are regulatory things we had to do in order to get reimbursed. So during the acquisition phase, there are some critical elements that are essential for success. These include institutional commitment, as I talked about before, leadership accountability, buy-in and vision. That leadership is executive leadership, nursing executive leadership, leadership on units, and in different groups. Involving key people, as I talked about end users and other key people. Networking, as in what kind of technical infrastructure do you have? I remember working at an organization in Pennsylvania who wanted to implement this really cool paging system that was encrypted and throughout most of the building that was built years and years and years ago, there was no way of getting connection. So we could plan all we want to, but we didn't have the infrastructure to support it. And until we did, the project was a waste of time. Databases. Where are you going to store the data that comes from this? Even if it's a small thing like a paging system, the data needs stored somewhere. So you have to have those infrastructure things. Again, I'm not saying the nurse leader needs to necessarily know what those are, but she or he needs to be at the table thinking about what these things are before we move forward on an acquisition. And then the actual applications themselves. So embarking on this health IT acquisition will need to include requests, a thing called requests for proposals. And I think you all have heard of those. They're often referred to as RFPs. So this is done to select the best match for organizations. So just an example, I'm giving EHRs, but this does not have to refer to EHRs. Cerner versus Epic. What's best for the organization? What's the best match? You go in to get a request for proposal. Elements of a RFP are the introduction to an organization, goals of selection, an overview of the whole process, functional requirements, mandatory technical requirements, vendor considerations, Examination of, let's say, current systems and problems. So it's kind of like a big business report and an RFP with it. Assessment of the requirements of clinical and technicals. Features and functions desired. So what are we trying to get out of this? Are we trying to get a new way of documenting and capturing data? Are we trying to get CPOE? Are we trying to get a pharmacy piece of it? These all need to go in the request. And defining the scope of the project. Is this just for one part of an organization, or is this for across a whole health system? And defining the functional elements in a care process. So the function of physician orders would be an example. Include questions like, is there an ability to co-sign an order? How do you handle verbal orders? Where are there groupings or order sets that you can create and determine the capabilities there. And then real critically, does this EHR or whatever system hit the requirements for safety and security? Once it is clear that a new system is needed, the next step is to assess the informational needs of the users. So, tip on selecting vendors, just a really important thing. A vendor is a vendor, and they're trying to sell you something. So consider the principle of buyer beware. Many times, healthcare providers do not apply an evidence-based system when selecting health IT. I can give you many examples of where a physician went to a conference and they were sold on this product, and they were just wined and dined and sold and gonna get it, but didn't make sense to the system, and it wasn't based on any evidence. It was based on really good salesmanship. So remember, buyer beware. If you think about the fact that most people don't select it based on the evidence, it gives you the reason that the actual failure rate in health IT acquisition of some things is 50 to 60%, or 50 to 80%. And that's a really big number, and think of the cost and time that we are dedicating. Also remember that it is a tough and competitive marketplace. And you got to know that the vendors are going to be in business when you want to go and have a product that's going to be used over a system of time. Many of these situations, again, can be avoided by asking just the right people the right questions at the right time before signing the contract. And again, I can't emphasize before signing that contract. So second, after those things, you want to do site visits in addition to demonstrations. So, they can come into your organization and give you a great demonstration. Perfect. They're going to bring what they think you want. Great idea is to go visit other sites. In fact, an ideal site visit is when the vendor is not involved at all, and you're hosted by a colleague that you know and can trust. It gives you the opportunity to talk to the typically randomly selected users, and it's really best to go when they're really busy. You're thinking, really? No, go when they're busy and tired, because they'll give you the untarnished truth about the product. They're sitting around not doing anything, which doesn't happen often. But when you're super tired, you're super busy, and somebody says, how's the system work? You're going to give them the truth really quickly. Third, what you can see and use rather than what is promised and planned. With vendors, what they promise and plan does not always go in things. So you should be able to see that they can actually do something, not say it's in our plan or our model for improvement in the next 2 years. That means you're not going to have it for 5. Fourth is to please remember that no vendor has it all. They don't. And they may think they have it all, and they may try to sell you that they have it all, but they don't. Fifth is if vendor philosophy is important, but users see the application, not the philosophy. So great that you have a vendor, but how does the application work? How does it meet our needs? How does it improve the care to patients? And how do our end users use it efficiently? And remember that the outcome is that is most important is the processes, as we talked about. So choose the right vendor. So let's now get to decision making. You're like, oh, I have to do all that stuff, and now we have to actually make a decision. So you want to consider if this was required building a new system, or that is designed in-house or within an organization, or if they'll have support that way. If you do decide to work with a vendor, it is useful to display a minimum and maximum number of vendors to be evaluated, because you don't want to evaluate 10 vendors. The cost of just doing that is going to be ridiculous to your organization. Typically, a high-level budget will be developed prior to the selection process, and it's used for decision making. So if X product costs $20 million and you have 2, you're not even going to look at that one. A cost-benefits analysis is needed when you're looking at those different things. In addition, the cost of completing the project lifecycle. So it's not just I'm going to get this, but what's it going to cost to actually do this and maintain the system? 2 or 3 vendors is probably about the most you want to do demonstrations and for going to visiting. You want them to show you functionality and features, and doing it during a time that you can actually have people evaluate and use a scoring tool. Again, remember visiting those comparable sites, and the project selection team should be comprised, very importantly, of both operational clinical staff and technical staff. Your informatics people, if they are the clinical informatics people, nursing informatics, they have both the clinical and some of the technical, but they are not 100% your IT people. So you need all of them, as well as end users and leadership. It is the charge of this group to make the final recommendation to the appropriate governance body with a detailed report. So this takes a lot of work to work together. And with a vendor now successfully selected, the contract negotiation begins. And that process is the first step in your relationship with the vendor. And it is an opportunity to see and set mutually beneficial goals and establish clarity of roles. So your next lecture will be on system implementation. And I hope this was helpful for you. And please let me know if you have any questions.